Hello, everybody, and welcome to What You Need to Know. I am Sybil Wilkes, and we'd like to invite you in to talk news and headlines, as well as what's going on in them streets. And we have the tale of the two Damons today on our broadcast, welcoming in Damon Williams and Damon A. Williams, and I'm sorry, Damon G. Williams and Damon A. Williams, and the G stands for...
Got a good son.
And he is a good man there. Hello, Damon A. Williams, and welcome.
How you doing? I appreciate you having me.
I appreciate your coming on. I know you're a busy man and you are making things happen, and we are so proud of you. And we will talk about all that you're doing. Damon, I ask about you all the time, ask about you from your dad. And I feel like I've watched you grow up, but also we have a connection in that you and I went to the same high school, not at the same time. I think I was there before you were before your dad was born, but I feel like that, you know what I mean? But we both went to Morgan Park Academy. And when did you start there? What grade?
I started there in fourth grade. So I got there a few weeks before 9/11.
Wow. Yep. Wow. That's incredible. So 2001. And I was there, like I said, a few years before, but I started in the third grade.
Okay.
And when I started, there were 3 Black kids. It was Jackie Jones, Steve Jones, her brother, and me.
Shout out to Jackie and Steve.
Exactly, right? And so I like to think that we laid the groundwork for you as you went through there, because it wasn't an easy time for us, but actually, and I don't know if you can speak to this, but they were some good years for me as well. So.
Yeah, we blacked it up a little bit. Me and my boys.
Man, did you ever?
In the bathroom by 2010. So it was a little bit different environment. But
the water fountains were different.
But shout out to everybody who's hearing this who went to Morgan Park Academy.
Yeah, let us say that to all the folks and all the alum from Morgan Park Academy, good old MPA. And as your dad pointed out, you're wearing the colors today. So
I am, accidentally.
Yeah, man.
I didn't have no school spirit when I'm there, but now I
But Damon A, also talk about the fact that you are going to be recognized by the Athletic Hall of Fame there at MPA. Not this year, unfortunately, because of coronavirus, but they're going to postpone it till next year.
Oh, well, thank you for any space to relive my glory days and to brag. Yeah, people don't know anymore because I'm all big wordy in the activism. But growing up, you know, I was very passionate on the basketball court, all-time leading scorer for a year, varsity starting point guard, and I think all-time leading steals as well. So I'm supposed to be in the Athletic Hall of Fame, but due to the pandemic, they're going to postpone it to next year. It's my 10 years since I graduated.
Oh, wow. How awesome is that? Awesome. And let me also tell you, there's another connection with you. There's a church here. It's called Saintsville Cathedral. And one of the leaders of the church is your former teacher before Morgan Park Academy. Is it Tiffany, Yolanda?
Oh,
yeah.
Formerly Miss Pace.
Exactly. It's Tiffany Pace. Yep. And we talk about you and your dad too. So
I love Miss Pace.
Yeah, and she loves you, by the way, and still speaks so fondly of you. And so
I loved Miss Pace too. She is the teacher from my teacher's joke.
And Damon, can you share that joke with us?
No, that's the time gone by.
Okay.
My wife is right
there. Damon A, do you know that joke?
Of course I do.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Okay. All right, so we're going to go back to their Damon. Yeah, right. They're going to go through their Damon G jokes and try to figure out.
I'll tell it. Yeah, the premise of the joke was, you know, when we were growing up, teachers were kind of, you know, matronly, I would say. But, you know, my son had a teacher so fine, I wanted to go up there every day. And that was Miss Pace. She was a nice lady. She was really beautiful. She was a good person. And you know, I was with Damon's mom, so I got the hell out of there. And she said she wondered why I used to be acting so crazy when I came up to the school, because I'd come in and I'd get right the hell up out of there, because I don't want no problem.
He said he used to hide my homework because I used to always get on the honor roll like a hater.
Yeah, I would have this homework so I could get a parent-teacher conference. But it was a joke.
All love and respect to Miss Pace.
And she is still as lovely as ever, and very committed to her students there at Saintsville Academy. So shout out to Tiffany Pace and to her family as well. We just went by her dad, went by the church a couple of weeks ago. Her dad was celebrating his birthday. And so Pastor Pace, we want to give you a shout out too. So Damon A., let me tell you a little bit about this. I have a newsletter called What You Need to Know. And every day we talk about 5 stories, and we send these stories out to our folks who subscribe to the newsletter. And for people who don't know about the newsletter, What You Need to Know, we give you these 5 stories that are basically of interest, and we hope of interest as well as useful to the African American community. Because like your dad, Damon, we learned under Tom Joyner, and super serving the African American community as you are doing now. And as a part of this, we also, when Tom just bailed on us and retired, had to come up with some other things.
The nerve of him.
You know, I know, right? That's what we're still saying, damn it. And so started this newsletter, and it's going along very well. And we just like to have the opportunity to talk to folks every day on this YouTube channel. And so for folks who would like to subscribe to the newsletter, if you go to sybilwilkes.com, you can subscribe, and we have this in your email box every Monday through Friday morning, just as you are getting up and starting your day. And a part of our newsletter today, Damon A., was, and Damon G., is the story about the horrific loss of lives on our city streets, especially amongst the babies this weekend, the 4th of July weekend, and knowing that these young people, and as we listed their names, a 6-year-old Jace of San Francisco, 7-year-old Natalia of Chicago, 8-year-old Royta of Hoover, Alabama, 8-year-old Sequoia of Atlanta, 11-year-old Devon or Davin of Washington, D.C., and 14-year-old Vernado Jones Jr. of Chicago as well. It is something, you know, we talk, and as we have talked so much in the last 2 months about Black Lives Matter because of the things that have gone on with adults, young people, but still adults, in terms of the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, the murder of Breonna Taylor, and the murder of George Floyd. But when we're talking about Black on Black crime, in our streets, and especially with these babies who will never live to even the ages of Ahmaud, Breonna, and George Floyd, the things that they will not be able to enjoy, and apparently, you know, just situations that are just so illogical. You know, one of these little boys, I want to say it was Devon, his grandfather is an activist like you are, Damon G. And so, I mean, Damon A. And so, you know, he knows what's going on in the streets, and his grandson was just there for the weekend, and he ran into the house to get a phone charger that his grandfather had forgotten in the house. And as he's headed out to the car into the house, gunfire erupts, and he was shot in the head. These are just, and I know, Damon, as a father, you just can't possibly imagine this happening to your child, and yet this is what people are living with every day. And unfortunately, and as you guys know, living in Chicago, the loss of lives of young people, no matter what the age, is not uncommon these days.
Absolutely. Well, as a father, I mean, I can't imagine, because I constantly am concerned, because Damon's in Chicago, in North Inglewood, putting in the work that he's doing, but you know, he could be a random victim. So I check on him all the time just to make sure he's keeping safe. And it's it's so unfortunate, and I don't know. I will let Damon speak to it because he's more knowledgeable about what's going on these streets. But you know, it's my biggest fear.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I want to begin with, you know, condolences to all of the families. This is the greatest tragedy imaginable. It is heartbreaking, and to me, you know, it speaks to the larger trauma and lack of resources for our people. And so, you know, these concentrated pockets of racial poverty, these concentrated pockets of lack of access to proper healthcare and education, right? That is a violent environment. And so it breaks my heart to then see the consequences and the results of people who, you know, are living in violent environments. So for me, first, I think of this as a mental health issue. And so even the way that it's framed and the way that it gets reported as this dichotomy, as there's this movement against one type of violence and there's this ignoring of this other type of violence, is really not true. And really like I feel like it's done with intention at like the larger structural scale, because that is what our movement is about. It is about the inequity in our community, is about the tragedy. And just because there's a different response when an institution kills somebody and when we have people without power and without resources doing horrible things in our community, that does not mean that it is not felt. So my first thing, you know, the thing that bothers me is like the lack of humanity with which it gets discussed and gets reported. One, we have to understand that we get these stories and statistics from police departments that have an investment in violence and community being framed in a certain way, as there are these crazy young Black men who are just, you know, untamable, and we live in the wild, wild west. And that's, you know, not exactly true, or it's not true, even though these horrible things are happening. So it's difficult to speak with the nuance for most people of like, yes, this is catastrophic, right? But this is still systemic, and this is directly related to the things that people are in the streets fighting for. So, you know, as somebody who is part of, you know, this push in society, this movement building, who was born and raised on the South Side of Chicago, did have privilege and was protected, but in no way was ignorant or foreign to the tragedy and violence in our community. This is why we say we need a new system, because obviously the system that we pay to respond does not prevent these things. And I believe that it is the inequity of investment and the lack of resources in the first place that creates this violence. And so it's not really a mystery why it happens, even though it's a tragedy. You know, for folks who are familiar with the Chicagoland area, right? Like, we know why Schaumburg and Naperville are not experiencing these things. They're not experiencing these things because they have resources, and those resources were gained through inequitable systems. So if you gave people, if you guaranteed housing, food, access to healthcare and mental health, one, those institutions will be able to respond to conflict and create better relationships. But two, healthy people don't kill people. That's just my theory. And so we have to look at this as an issue of health. And if you're seeing a young person, that's like, you know, that's the rates of PTSD in Chicago are similar to folks, you know, experiencing warfare or battle zones, right? So we're talking almost like the psychology of child soldiers. And so to think that that is going to be fixed by like a military solution, as opposed to a larger communal infrastructure that can give folks what they need and create healthy relationships, you know, we need to acknowledge how much is missing when we talk about the tragedies that we experience, particularly when we're losing our babies.
See, that's why I let him answer, Sybil.
It's a positively brilliant presentation and representation of where we are, and also giving us some structure, Damon, in terms of where we go from here, because you have set it up. And so my question to you is, from those of us from the outside looking in, what can we do to support you, to help you, and to stop this and to make that change on our streets? Because I still have my parents' home in Chicago. I still love my city. You know what I mean? And I don't want another generation to have to go through this. And I want to support organizations like yours. So, and people all over the country are probably watching and asking the same thing. What can we do?
I mean, there's an infinite amount of ways folks can get involved. If you want to support our work here on the ground, there's a few spaces you can look at. One, the Let Us Breathe Collective. So that's Let Us Breathe 773. You can obviously support, via donation or just like following and being in tune and sharing the information. Also, you can look out again in Chicago, we've developed a Black Abolitionist Network. On a national level, if folks want to plug in, I would look in two spaces that are pretty much connected or related. The Movement for Black Lives and the Rising Majority, that does a good job of letting folks know what are the campaigns, what are the organizers, what are the movements locally, and trying to connect some of the messaging and platforms of it. But what I usually push people to do is it's usually not about like being super active. I'm really interested in transforming people's consciousness and understanding of what's going on. Because usually when we hear those first stories, particularly the way it's reported in Chicago, and I want to just like, again, name that we're not getting this information from like an unbiased source. This information is being packaged and reported and manufactured by the police department that has a political, and the Fraternal Order of Police that has a political investment in making their job tenable and making them feel needed, and making sure that it's connected to a way that controls property value and is profitable in terms of how news can report. So even when we talk about violence, the violence of Black women gets left out, the violence of sexual assault. Actually, Black women statistically are the highest victims of gun violence, but we don't talk about domestic violence because that's now profitable and that doesn't control property value because that's happening in the home. We don't talk about what's happening to queer people and to trans people and to sex workers. And that does not get discussed in the trauma and the violence. The only thing that we talk about is this patriarchal masculine competition. There's crazy boys and men on this block, and there's crazy boys and men on this block, and we need to come send an army to wipe them out and get them out of here. And so what I want people to understand is we have been living under an oppression that many of us have normalized or seen or have not seen and has gone invisible. So in Chicago, for example, of our public budget, 40% of it goes to a violent police department that is statistically proven to be ineffective in stopping violence, and is abusive and torturous and villainous and criminal. While we barely have, the investment in housing is minimal. The investment into family and protective service is minimal. So what I say is we need to understand this system comes from slavery, torture, and warfare. This system is what constructed and maintained Jim Crow apartheid. This system is what attacked and destroyed the movements of the 60s and 70s. And so I want Black people to know that, hey, we can demand new systems, or we ourselves can show up in new ways. But once terrible things happen, we cannot rely on slave catchers and torturers to come fix it, because they don't. They actually perpetuate it. So, here in Chicago, people don't know. They say, hey, we're talking about all of this. We talk about the police, but what about Chicago? We need the police. The South and West Side is dangerous, but no one then finishes or does the very simple Google of saying, oh, wait, Chicago has the most police per capita of any city in America. So maybe the investment into a violent institution to respond to violence actually perpetuates and creates violence. Maybe the people who are shooting guns have already had experiences with police, prisons, and jails and are now traumatized or in a more violent state. Why don't we invest into health? And why don't we also show up, right? So that's another thing, is that in the last 40 to 50 years, we've promoted this notion of individualism, of I'm gonna get mine, of the hustle mentality, 24/7, it's all about my little plot of land with my gate and my fence. And we have lost notions of collective community. So one, if you are concerned, that means you have to do something also. So some of the things that looks like could just be, starting a neighborhood block club, of starting, a little candy lady store on the corner, right? Of starting sports and arts activities, right? It doesn't all have to be these high political, super dense theory or super like antagonistic, we're protesting things. But it does need to be communal, because that's where, when we're talking about violence or harm, we're asking for accountability, and accountability can't happen without relationships. So if we want to stop violence, we need to have healthy relationships, and that takes people and that takes resources, and we have to stop allowing the investment into a white supremacist violent institution to be the response to anti-Black destruction in our community.
Damon, I think I know the answer to this, but it doesn't seem like there is, or is there a coincidence in the fact that over the last couple of months and call for a defunding of police departments in this country, and now the numbers that have been reported about the shootings and the violence on our streets?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that, it has started before the call, but it's definitely been pushed out. And I always, whenever you hear the language, and I know you use that, I don't mean to like be offensive, but like when you use the language black on black crime, that was intentionally created. That words did not exist except for to defend racism. So just to let us know that like we should stop looking at it that way, and understanding that these are more human situations. So for example, if you're in Chicago, is it black on black crime, or is there an internal conflict with the BDs, right? Or is it black on black crime, or is it Sean and Denzel from across the block who had an argument about a girlfriend and don't have the skills to communicate and de-escalate a situation, right? So the way that it gets reported, there's never humanity. There's never, it's this statistic numbers, almost like sports based reporting. There was 102 this year. There was 100 last year. We're up 2%. It's getting
and
worse.
Where we were this time last year and post-pandemic and, all of that.
Our lives are not statistics, right? So once I see the reporting that one is not coming from community, so it's only coming from police departments. And I see it in that number-based way that is about their statistics, about their arrest rate, and about their funding, and about their successes. I don't trust it. And I believe that it is to continue this idea that Black people are inherently pathological. So they don't say, oh, we have 18 to 20,000 government employees with guns, tasers, cages, and cuffs on their waist. And in Chicago, we have one public psychologist. Right? So Chicago specifically, if we want to talk about violence, Chicago during the Rahm Emanuel administration had the largest school closure in the history of the United States, right? We closed down half and then did it again, all of our mental health institutions. And then on the federal level, we get these cuts to aid and to food stamps or to the link system, right? So we are creating tragedy, a language that two Black feminist scholars, Ruth Wilson Gilmore and Beth Ritchie, say is organized abandonment, right? And so, our communities, it's better than this language like food deserts, because that makes it sound natural. Another way to say it is food apartheid, right? So our cities are designed and organized in very specific spatial ways. And it's about maintaining labor. It's about maintaining political control. It's about the capital of downtown, right? So Chicago is not broke. Chicago is the second financial hub in the United States. We have the Chicago Board of Exchange. All of the banks have headquarters downtown. Billions and trillions of dollars go through our city every year. And it's an exploitation and extraction from the South and West Side to put those cranes downtown and to create these big shiny buildings. And that's where our food is. That's where our healthcare is. And so that is violence to me. And so when people just talk about a 16-year-old with a gun who has no resources and power, before you talk about the people who are intentionally and benefiting from this inequity, usually that is rooted in some internalized, or if it's not Black people, but usually that's rooted in anti-Blackness. It's this idea that Black people are inherently pathological and need to get their stuff together, as opposed to Black people are living in violent conditions. And no matter where in the world, if there are violent conditions, violence will happen. So whether we're talking about Brazil or Afghanistan or the Congo, once people are in desperate need, once you have generational trauma compounding upon itself, there will be disorder and dysfunction. And we know everywhere in the world what it takes to make people healthy. We know what it takes to stop addiction. We know how to intervene into intimate partner and domestic violence. But in Chicago, we choose not to do it because it is more profitable and more efficient to invest into a military instead of investing into people.
The military industrial complex, and as well as our prison industrial complex.
Yeah, which I say are the same thing, actually.
Yeah, I get it. In a city like Chicago, and we're using that as an example because that's where we're all from and we understand politics in that city. Do you see a difference in this administration and working in an effort to make some real systemic changes, or more of the same?
Are we talking about Lori Lightfoot?
Yes, sir.
Lori Lightfoot is a disgrace and an enemy of the people. Lori Lightfoot is I'll give her credit as an effective performer of political theater, but she is continuing a neoliberal destruction of our city, and is, on the day that I was slammed on my head and concussed, she painted the Sears Tower blue. And everywhere else in the country, people are redistributing budgets and resources. And she is boldly saying, we are keeping cops in schools and we are keeping 40% of our budget into this institution. And nanny boo boo. I don't care what you have to say. She also, the only reason, again, I say it's like excellent political theater and I guess media culpability.
It is. It really is.
No one talks about the fact that she was a special prosecutor. She was a head of the internal police review that covered up all of these murders. She was appointed by Rahm Emanuel once the Laquan McDonald video and the Lakia Boy pressure was, and she was the one in front of us, silencing us. She was the one, I watched her before anybody knew her name, disrespect and dismiss family members whose sisters and sons were murdered by the police in cold blood. You know, yeah, she I mean, it gets personal for me. Like I can get kind of repulsed, particularly because I think it was intentional. So our movement, right, just to name, was shaped and is led one by Black women and Black queer women. And then we also have this philosophy of we need to have intersectional consciousness. So we call it Black queer feminism. And so I believe that it was a political ploy to put a Black queer woman who was supported by Republican money, was supported by Rahm Emanuel money and corporate financial institutions to silence us and to say, oh, we can't be racist because look at this Black woman who's here with this weird haircut. And so, you know, I just want everyone to know that she needs to go. She is not a progressive. I think the time right now, seeing what's happening in LA and Seattle and Minneapolis, and then hearing what she is saying, we have to understand also the political reality of Chicago is that we have a Democratic monopoly in our city. And so conservatives just say that they are Democrats and then perform progressivism. So I believe she actually is supported by a Republican base that does not have enough electoral power, but they have enough funding power to get somebody in office. And all Black people should know that she is not connected to the Black community in Chicago, and she is investing in our destruction. And her whole thing is around making Chicago more profitable for corporations, and all of the rest is a ploy.
Do you see a connection, Damon, between what is happening in Chicago with the Black mayor, Black female mayor, and what folks are saying in the Black Lives Matter in Los Angeles regarding their DA, Jackie Lacey, and how she, and they're calling for her to drop out of the race for her third term as DA because she is not doing what Black folks thinks that she needs to be doing, and that is taking on those police cases and those police violence cases.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not as super familiar with the specific campaign.
Yeah, right.
But it connects a lot to what we did here a couple of years ago with Anita Alvarez, who's not a Black woman, but a Latinx woman. So the same like POC dynamics. So I'll just speak like at large also around the idea, because that's another contradiction is now we think a Black face in any position of power is just an inherently a good thing, and that historically.
What more do you people want?
But also, any prosecutor that is not explicitly decarceral is then a carceral agent, and so you could be nicer, or you can say I know y'all, but unless you are saying we are changing the system, so I would shout out the DA in San Francisco, Chaser, I think his last name. Also, I know in Philadelphia, they do some good work. But
Lawrence, his name is it Lawrence?
I think so.
Yeah.
But unless you were basically saying, hey, my office is the problem and we actually need to change this system, that you then are perpetuating violence, no matter how churchified, no matter how Black Greekified, no matter how HBCUified you are, you are participating in a destructive system, even if you have good intentions and want to be helping. There is no such thing as a progressive prosecutor unless they are explicitly anti-carceral.
Damon G., where did this kid come from?
Well, to be honest, when he was a kid, I always used to tell him to start his day to be a leader, right? And I never knew that he would take it to this level. So I'm just like, don't follow the knuckleheads in class. But I really believe that he, when he went away to school, he had an African-American studies professor and was a Black woman. And I think she opened that third eye. And speaking of that, the first thing I asked him was like, did you hit that? Because he spoke so highly of her, but I didn't recognize this guy. I'm like, I thought he had a little Jada August Alsina thing going. But when he became this guy, he went away to school and he started reading and started, knowledgeable. But I would say this: at a younger age, he had a goal. He wanted to change the South Side of Chicago. He said that at a very young age. He wanted to open a strip mall and call it, was it Williams Court or Williams Square?
Something. Yeah.
Yeah, that's as a youngster. So he really always wanted to, be there for his people. But now, as you can see, I had to just sit here. In fact, you could just ask him to come. I'm glad to see him on Zoom because, it's hard to catch up with him. But, I'm sitting there like, okay, yeah, tell him. So when people ask, where's Damon Williams in the movement? Luckily, the best thing I ever did was name him after me because Damon is in the movement, whether I'm there or not.
Yeah. Yeah. I just think because when you were a kid, your whole thing was about economics, about investment and the finances and things like that. So this professor at Grinnell is she instrumental as your dad?
Yeah. I'm gonna name my two professors, Keisho Scott and Shauna Benjamin. Definitely provided me access to just being able to look at the history of our people and structures and to start to bring in some theory and what have the texts said. My basis as a very young person, while some of these skills were developed, at age 9, I started doing this seminar, this speech around financial inequity, around financial investment, economic inequity, and about how we as Black people can change our circumstances. So that gave me an idea of system that led me to studying economics and sociology. And then there, I some of the limitations of my framework were then exposed to me as well. Of this could work for folks with privilege and access, or who are really brilliant or excellent or elite, but this is actually not sustainable, a sustainable model for our community. And there's also back to this idea of learning that, I've been taught that there is this pathology that Black people have, right? Like what our generations told us is that, white people are okay because at the dinner table, they talk about stocks and bonds. And we don't, right? They have this knowledge passed down and we're ignorant and we've been cut off. But then I learned statistics like, Black people attempt to start businesses at a rate 2 to 1, or Black people have been saying these things since the 50s, 60s, and 70s. There is not a lack of knowledge. Most businesses actually fail, right? That the way capitalism works, small business and investing in corporations is not going to change the inequity. And so once I then began to learn how capitalism started, that there is no capitalism without slavery, and that slavery and racism and capitalism were created at once, then I was like, this is systemic. And so once I started to see systems at a larger level, because I already understood industry or market, or I could see that, hey, they're putting more Walgreens here, so there may be a growth in their revenue, and then let's see how their dividends are going to be next quarter, right? Like I was able to see those things and then apply that to a larger global and world framework. And then I started to learn about liberation traditions. So, knowing about obviously the slave trade and chattel slavery, but learning, about Du Bois, learning about Ella Baker, learning about particularly the Black Power movement of, this, we were saying these things 50 years ago and it was actively intentionally destroyed. Two things I think particularly that then provoked me to say, okay, this is not something I can reconcile, is really looking deeply into the murder of Fred Hampton and then the MOVE bombing in Philadelphia in the 80s. And so, I was able to then spend time with them recently, which is also just like a personal thing. They came to our space now that all of them are free. But just learning that, the state beyond just, Emmett Till has been systematically killing and destroying our ability to organize and communicate with people around the world. I learned that there were these Black-led revolutions throughout the continent and indigenous people throughout the Americas, and that our government actively destroyed governments, killed people, and that same investment is still happening right now. And so, this is around the same time that the language of like Chirac was starting to become a thing, and everybody was so embarrassed by it. But that was one of the times like, I'm seeing the world differently, because I thought it was beautiful street poetry and a recognition of global geopolitics, even if you're not saying it, to say, the closing down of our schools and our hospitals is very similar to the bombing of the schools and the hospitals of Iraq. The arming of these militarized assault rifles that are pulling up on 71st Street is similar to us sending Marines and armies and drones to bomb weddings and destroy people for resources. And so once I started to see these things, and then as somebody who was getting an economics degree, knowing that in every study, they just had to put this thing to the side of, there are 500,000 to 1 million Black men in jail. And so, we have to like redo the statistics to kind of like cancel that out. And then let's just talk about those that have had access. And so just keep seeing that over and over again, while also learning about race theory, about sociology, about gender and my own privilege and patriarchy and how oppression was affecting all of us. It became like a point of responsibility to the ancestors to like widen my view and widen my tongue and honor where we come from. Because, I don't blame people for not understanding, because it was really intentional misinformation to get us to buy into something that is really violent and really destructive. But it wasn't getting from the back to the front of the bus. It was the idea of, why ain't this bus free and for everybody in the first place, right? Like, or why do I need to bus 2 hours to work to then bus back home, right? Like looking at the system of, oh, this is not healthy, and there are other ways that we can live, and that we're destroying the planet also. This is also connected to like the environment. Like if we don't stop doing these things in 30 to 40 years, we can't do anything else. So it's just a point of urgency, and being provoked with things that you can't unlearn, and then being really fortunate to be around, I just want to keep shouting out Black women. So, after having this education, having my sister, who's an artist and thinker and poet, who we started organization with, and having folks in organizations such as BYP 100 and Asada's Daughters here in Chicago, my mentor, Barbara Ransby, who wrote the book on Ella Baker, being able
Which
to
is a great book, by the way.
Yes,
Can I just
yes.
say, just really, yeah.
Everybody
absolutely.
go check that out. Being able to meet Angela Davis, right? Like,
What was that like? So that's what I want to know.
Our afros touched. This is before my hair was braided.
Hey, Sybil. So see, I gave you the short answer of where that kid came from, and he gave you the correct answer.
I'm long-winded. I'm sorry.
No, I love it. So tell me about the meeting with Angela Davis, because it's moments like that for most of us that have not had that experience are like, wow, what is that like? What was that moment?
It was wild. You've been around iconic people, and so this surrealness of like, usually those type of folks are often the most comfortable and natural, but you're also like sitting there like, man, I'm eating a vegan meal with the Angela Davis. And so actually that goes back to the story of, at Grinnell, they have this thing called freshman tutorial. So that's the only required class you have to take. It's the first thing you do when you get to campus, and it's for your whole first semester. And so I was luckily placed into a neo-soul and Black feminism tutorial. It could be about anything. It could be around like cooking. It could be around like building bridges, whatever a professor wants to do. And so the first assignment was to watch a speech on Angela Davis. And I was embarrassed as a 17-year-old because I didn't even know she was still alive. Right. And so hearing her speak and hearing her be vibrant, right? Because the whole idea is like they killed everybody from the 60s, but they, they killed all the men, and all the men also, went to jail or had their own conflict. But most of the women are actually still here and still alive and continued the tradition. So it was one, hearing her critique President Obama as an imperialist, but she didn't do it angrily. And so I was not yet in that place, but what she said made sense, and she said it very simply. And then she said another thing of, you cannot be anti-racist without being feminist. And it was just like a very matter-of-fact sentence. And that was my first college assignment to like write about this speech that she had just made. And so then fast forward 7-8 years later, where the mentor whose house I go to all the time is best friends with her, or they hang out all the time, have known each other for 30 years. And we're just talking. And then she did a speech, and she felt that she could not come to Chicago without naming the Let Us Breathe Collective, the organization that me, my family, my partner started. So it was really an honor, and it's one of those things of like, oh yeah, this is a lifetime struggle, and it's great to see that example of what 50 to 60 years can do for us. So she's really like I always call her like the Michael Jordan, but it's really like the Bill Russell or Wilt Chamberlain of this. Right? Like
I love that. Okay.
We would not have the language of abolition if it was not for the Free Angela campaign, and her being connected to George Jackson of the Soledad Brothers in the 60s and 70s, and then taking Du Bois's notion of abolition democracy from Reconstruction and then applying it to the prison industrial complex. So without her, we would not be looking at prisons. We would not be looking at police the way that we do. So it's like, it's like being able to kick it with Jay-Z, or being able to hang out with Mike.
Of the movement,
it grounded me. It was so encouraging. But it's really just like a starstruck, like, hey, just can we take a picture? We hanging out, drinking wine, so she was great, and it was definitely a life-changing experience.
Damon A. Williams, what keeps you going? Because I can imagine, because trust and believe, I live in Texas now, so that's a whole different thing. But I'm even thinking of an environmental or a meteorological down of Chicago, those months of January, February, March, April, May, until the snow stops in sometime in July, But what keeps you going? And knowing that you found your purpose and that you are in it to win it, to make a difference, to improve our station, our whole mental and physical and financial station of life.
Yeah, I mean, some of it again is historical. So Ta-Nehisi Coates said this really great thing, and I borrow it, and I got to meet him too. Shout out to Barbara Ransby again. So he a lot of people are really selfish in just the way we're trained to think about everything in life and how the world wants. So everything is about what I can do and what I want right now. It's something that he says that aligns with how I think spiritually and about ancestry. Is like, we need to understand chattel slavery was 7 generations. And we're not taught about it in the most accurate ways, but we need to accept that in each of those 7 generations, people lived and died wanting, demanding, fighting, struggling, resisting for freedom, right? We were never passively, holistically just accepting this torture.
Right.
But imagine being in that 4th generation, right? Imagine living and dying, wanting freedom, trying to escape, try to protect your children, trying to make sure you survive to continue our legacy so that we can be here. But your parent, grandparent, and great-grandparent lived and died in captivity, and your child, grandchild, and great-grandchild are gonna live and die in captivity. But you in that 4th generation, we will not get past it if you do not continue to live and struggle. So for me, it's one, recognizing that this is not about me, and then coming out of emancipation from chattel slavery to these new forms of institutional slavery that we have, seeing in every decade these movements, seeing the violence that people experience, seeing people get blackballed, seeing the McCarthyism of the 50s and 60s, seeing COINTELPRO, the pressure and the burden that my forebearers had to experience is so much lighter than some Twitter trolls or Donald Trump saying something on CNN, right? Like we have so much. I mean, it still is some danger involved, but we have so much comfort and so much privilege that one is, it would be a disgrace. And then 2, seeing that there were also a lot of people that got in the way. There were lots of people that sold out. There were lots of people that were selfish about it. I want to give an anti-shout out to Eldridge Cleaver of the Black Panther Party, who was extremely violent and patriarchal and misogynist. And his whole thing was, I want revolution in my lifetime. So he then participated in the destruction of that important organization, institution that we should still have, but is in shambles or doesn't really exist anymore. So then seeing how that selfishness was able to destroy and create conflict, knowing that this is, not about me. And then also, shout out to my mother and father who, made sure that I had what I needed, made sure I was protected from so much of the trauma and turmoil that, it's a point of privilege to be able to speak like this, right? And so there's a responsibility. Like when I see my people, they don't have what I had, and most people who were able to have what I had was gone somewhere, right? So they were out in the suburbs, or they had this identity issue, but I was given access while still being in the middle of the city and still being very much connected, hooping all over, being able to be connected to what's going on. So I had an understanding, I had access, I was able to be in elite spaces while also being able to see poverty up close and being able to see violence up close. And so, there's a responsibility to my people that it took a lot of work from my parents, it took a lot of work on my behalf to be able to see and say these things. And most people don't have the support. Most people are just struggling to feed themselves and to get through day to day. And so because I have this, it feels, there's nothing else that I really can do. I would kind of be ashamed of myself to have this knowledge, to know about the revolutionary struggles, to try to make this world a better place, and to just go and, I don't know, try to be an accountant somewhere, try to look pretty on camera, and get popular or get more money within a capitalist framework when I know how violent that is. And so, it's really just a point of responsibility.
But like your dad, you too have your foot in radio and in media, don't you?
I do. So shout out to Ergo Radio and my co-host and co-executive producer, Daniel Kisslinger. We started on a local community station, WHBK in Chicago, historic station, the first station to play hip hop in the city, but then also going to the podcast space. So we still do, well, we haven't since Corona, but before the pandemic, we still broadcast live on WHBK, but we record these long form conversations with different activists, artists, healers, educators, thinkers within a movement space, because we started in 2015 when the movement for Black Lives or Black Lives Matter was really bubbling, and I was a part of it. I'm also an artist. And so, from like 2012 or so, 2011 to like 2015, 2016, there was also this independent arts renaissance that was happening. So out of that, in the hip hop scene, you get, artists like Chance the Rapper, but like more specifically, I'm more connected to folks like No Name and Saba and like Nick Jenkins. Those names might not ring out for your audience, but these are like prolific artists that just came from art programs in our city, and these are my folks. And so it became very clear that the same people that were showing up to these open mics were the same people who were showing up to or helping to organize these protests. And so trying to create a space that caught the overlap or the intersection of political movement and cultural movement, and naming how our city, how our environment created or challenged these people to like create a living archive. Because back to Fred Hampton, as somebody who was like really eager to get into this work, I study him. He's an icon here in Chicago.
Yeah.
He's this martyr and he's this larger than life figure. But I look on the internet and there's less, all the scraps and all the clips, there's less than 60 minutes of his voice that exists on all of the searching I could do through YouTube and through the internet. So that feels like a historical loss and tragedy. So back to this like generational push, I want to imagine what future generations will need, because this fight will not be over, and they can look back like, man, there was some really historical things going on in Chicago. Here's an archive, here's a document, here's a conversation that lets us know what were the lessons, how were these things created, and like, what does it take to be more creative and more equitable to make a more just world. So that's Ergo every Thursday at noon.
So that's Ergo, that's AIRGO.
Ergo Radio is usually the handle on social media platforms or on all streaming, Apple, Spotify, SoundCloud. And we just right now are putting out an abolitionist suite. So if anybody is like hearing these words of defund the police or abolition, and that sounds crazy and that sounds wild and I'm scared and what we gonna do, and there we have some of the leading thinkers of this work and of this notion and of this tradition coming to our show. So you can check that out actually right now. And the first episode is up with Miriam Kaba, who everybody should just know her name and know everything that she has done. So check us out, Ergo Radio.
Has your dad been on your broadcast?
He has been on Ergo, and then he came to one of our live shows and was our special guest. So yeah, shout out to
How
Pop.
was that?
It was actually lit because, me being silly, I brought drinks.
We're also silly too.
We got really comfortable, and we addressed some issues, but it was he paid homage to me as an artist, and it felt good to, see what his interpretation of what I've done in my career and my sacrifices and things for his life and things of that nature. So that was really a fun time. And his partner, Daniel, is very knowledgeable. Daniel can tell you everything about every bird in the tree.
Every minor league baseball team.
Yeah.
Every Italian philosopher.
No, Daniel Kissinger is a very impressive young man. So to sit there with them and be in that historic, because it's on the campus of University of Chicago, and so they had all these records behind us, and I'm an artist as well, Gucci D, which is really funny because one of his partners, one of his friends, found a copy of my album in LA.
Oh my God, you're kidding!
Yeah, out in a vintage record store. So now the generations connected. So I felt like I belonged in the space because
Gucci D was in the house. There we go.
Go bite the dust.
He found this for me and gave it to me as a gift because I didn't even have copies myself.
Oh my gosh, that is so great. Damon, I am so proud of you. And I know that the folks that have been watching have just been transfixed by listening to you today. And so first of all, how can we follow you, and how can we keep hearing more from you?
I'm at Damon_AF, DAMON_AF on Twitter and Instagram. Definitely follow Ergo if you really literally want to hear me. You know, that's really where I get into my bag and we get deeper into these things on a weekly basis. So we got about close to 260 episodes already. So it's a pretty good catalog that you can go back and educate yourself with. And in general, you know, if you want to kind of connect with me or what I'm talking about, just listen to anybody who's talking about defunding the police or abolition. Folks need to understand, people might not recognize because the news, again, does not portray things in a full way. We are living in the largest uprising in human history. Black Lives Matter is the largest social movement in human history. So you should be really proud to be alive right now, to be connected. The way people talk about the 60s and how they was all marching, it wasn't everybody, but everybody gets credit, right? So even y'all who are sitting at home, 50 years from now, you are gonna be a part of the biggest thing, and it's transforming our society. So look anywhere for language around defunding the police and abolition, and then we'll be connected in family, and know that this is a liberatory tradition. It is rooted in love and community, and it's about finding solutions. It's not just about an absence of a violent system. It is about a presence of love and healing and restoration and transformation. And so know that is possible for all of us, but it is not an individual or individualistic pursuit. It is a collective effort. So know that you need your people, go get your people, and know that this place is not healthy and not built for us, and we have a responsibility to do something different.
Wow, that's powerful.
So that being said, make sure that they know about Let Us Breathe 773.
73. Yep.
Please.
That's our organization. The Let Us Breathe.
That's your organization is Let Us Breathe 773. That's the area code there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just tell you from a generational standpoint, you met Ta-Nehisi Coates. I met his dad, Paul Coates, who is a brilliant man as well. Paul Coates was on the cruise with us one year. He was the guest of Walter Mosley when he was part of my book club. And just hearing him tell the stories and some of the conversations we had, I've read Ta-Nehisi, but I've never had the opportunity to meet him. But like Ta-Nehisi, you come from really great stock. Yeah. And you both should be proud of each other. But Damon, what a great job. Damon G and Damon A, what a masterful job you are doing in your living.
Thank you.
So I'm very proud of you, and I thank you for joining us. We didn't even get through the news stories and stuff, but your conversation and what you're doing and your stories about and your outlook, your perception about the way things are in our world, and what you're doing to transpose a lot of that way of thinking is transfixing. And so I would love for you to come back again and
I'm here for you.
Continue these conversations.
Thank you for making this space. I've been listening to you my whole life, so it means so
yeah,
much.
I get that a lot.
I still remember the It's Your World days.
I love it. But you know what? I remember meeting you at family reunion.
Yeah.
And a lot of people may not recognize that, but this young man, and speaking about a business and finance at that point, and many years ago at the Tom Joyner family reunion, and you are just you're amazing, and I know we use that word a lot, but I mean it. You are very special, and we look forward to it. So, and before we go, I got to tell you, Damon A, that a lot of folks miss Damon G's happy hour.
Yeah.
So
you got to get back on it.
Okay, we know you're keeping up your happy hour, but we need the music too. You're a hell of a DJ, Damon G.
Yeah. Well, I was doing that, basically in Chicago, we were shut in and the weather was prohibitive for going out. But Chicago and Illinois specifically is doing well with the numbers. So a lot of people are moving around. Plus, I've been doing a lot of projects around the house, and I couldn't commit to the 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock every day. But I think I'm gonna have to do something about it. I think I'm gonna do it live actually. So I'm gonna do it, find a place, outdoor venue, and just have people come out and kick it with us. But this weekend, of course, we're going to try to do riddles and see how that works socially.
That's what I was going to ask you next about, because that has
but
been.
I'm glad. I'm just glad to be able to sit here with the two of you. Next time, Sybil, you don't have to ask me. You know, you can just, invite Damon.
But here's the other thing, and it's very selfish on my part, but to watch him and to watch you watching him is just, it's a beautiful thing. It really is.
It was beautiful for me. And of course, I'm joking, and we're happy to do what we can for our people, be it via laughter and music or knowledge and power. The combination, I think, is being helpful.
Powerful.
And, you know, I have some intellect, but, you know, I was sitting here chilling, let him, you know, do his thing.
But Damon, let me tell you, your dad, and you know this, your dad is really very smart. And most comedians, good comedians, are very smart. But you could hear him on the show and a lot of the conversation that we had off the air and even on the air, just how brilliant. So you come from really good stuff.
It's the wittiness. And also, you know, part of my work is, you know, I'm a facilitator and an MC of movement. So, you know, growing up in comedy clubs allows me to be the way I am in the space that I am. You know, it takes a lot sometimes to be able to keep a large group of people together, especially when you're talking about really traumatic things. So knowing how to be funny on a mic and knowing how to just control the crowd, you know, I am in his legacy. So I'm forever grateful and always proud to, you know, to wear the name on my back and front.
Nice. So Damon, tell us again about Riddles this weekend.
That's nothing. Riddles Comedy Club. It's Leon
It
Rogers.
is something because you're getting back out there.
Yeah, actually, it's to be my third time performing, period. It's the first time indoors since the pandemic. And we're only doing 50 people, socially distanced. And we're doing 3 shows a night so they can come in. The shows will be shorter, come in, get out, in case, you know, the airborne situation takes place. Laughter is ha-ha and spitting. So,
yeah.
You know, so we're going to get them in, we're going to get them out, we're going to have fun. Beyond that, though, I just want to say that thank you for having my son on here, because his voice, he's enlightened me in so many ways. It's informed me in how I deliver my humor now, as far as humanity and being concerned about people's gender, preference, the pronouns and things of that nature. So he continues to enlighten me. He's given me some suggestions of books that I need to be reading so I can speak more clearly and articulate better, but I'm all the way behind him, and I'm out here still hustling, still working, because the revolution must also be subsidized. Anything he needs, right? Anything he needs, I'm there for him. And
he's a revolutionary funder.
So,
and that's actually not a joke. You know, we've sheltered people, fed. You know, it's not just like the naming of the system at the breathing room space in Chicago. You know, we've taken care of a lot of people. A lot of people ask me for things. And a lot of times it's more than I have. You know, I'm not, you know, I'm still growing up and coming up. And so he doesn't even know, but a lot of ways that he supports me has gone out to the community. So he actually is a philanthropist without his consent.
So if anybody out there wants to take the burden off my shoulders because I'm unemployed, you can hit their Cash App for Let Us Breathe Collective. What's your Cash App for the organization?
I'm pretty sure it's just $ Let Us Breathe, and then Let Us Breathe.
Let Us Breathe $.
Yeah, $ Let Us Breathe on Cash App. Let Us Breathe 2015 at PayPal.
That is great. That's great. And folks who listen to the radio show, who used to listen to the Tom Jordan Morning Show, I just have one more question to ask you, Damon G. Is that boat still loose, or are you able to get out on the water?
Man, when I tell you. That, we need a whole nother. He said, "Look, man, I got everything brand new. I got your new harness, new electronics. I found out where the leak was. You'll be ready by the middle of the month." Now, he told me this in June. It is July 7th. I promise you, by July 15th, I will not be on that boat. But God bless Brother Reverend T, because he's so Christian with it that you believe it. You know, it's like it's sort of like the white Jesus story. You know, it's like, okay. That man said, he said, "Praise the Lord, I'm going to have your boat ready in Jesus' name." You know, I probably see Jesus before I see my boat. So it still took a loose.
God, you know what? We got to go back over that story next time you come on and talk about it, because between your dad, Damon, talking about the boat and the mechanic, it's just been great. It was a great,
man.
it was, and it went for weeks. Weeks.
And people still asking. I'm telling you, now that the summers rolled around, that's one of the first questions I get on Instagram. What's up with your boat? Man, look here. Christ One Auto still has my boat. That's the name of his company, Christ One Auto.
We gotta go, guys. Thank you, Damon A. Thank you, Damon G. We appreciate you guys, the Williams men, ladies and gentlemen. And Damon A., tell your mom I said hi. And Damon G., you tell Margot and Juanita I said what up too. Okay?
Will do.
All right,
We
you
love
guys,
you,
take
Sybil.
care.
Much
Love you
Sybil.
too.
Thank you so much.
We'll be back tomorrow with Steve and Hill. It's Wednesday, and we will talk to you then. Bye.
Thanks, son.